Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thank You Next. My name is Andrea.
And I'm Mia.
And this is our first episode of this series where we plan on having more casual conversations based off of our own experiences.
So today we're going to talk about the invisible string theory in the frame of artists that we've discovered through this theory. So just to kind of define invisible string theory, it's just a theory that there's an invisible string connecting you to each person or thing that you're meant to find. So it's a little like destiny. And that's kind of the way we found to kind of explain how we've found a lot of our favorite artists.
So we are going to start off by talking about Charlie Puth, because I discovered him as an artist in early 2023. And I had known who he was prior to that, but I never listened to his more underrated music. So that's when I actually took a deeper dive into his discography, and I listened to all of his music and I really enjoyed it. And then not long after, I told Mia about it. And she also started listening to his music. And yeah, now I'll have her talk about her experience as a fan herself.
Yeah, so about 3 years ago, again, Andrea recommended Charlie Puth. And usually I tend to kind of stay within a specific kind of cluster of artists. Like I become attached to certain songs and artists, and it's hard for me to kind of break out and listen to other ones. So it's really saying something that she was able to convince me to listen to Charlie. And so, 3 years ago, I listened through his entire discography. And a lot of this time I was listening, I was working on art. So it's kind of in the background of my creative work. And I noted down the songs of his that I especially enjoyed and then added them to my basic playlist. So a couple of these songs that I chose were That's Not How This Works and Is It Just Me? And also Change. And then also earlier this year, when Charlie released his most recent album, Whatever's Clever, I downloaded it and listened through it multiple times. And in this album especially, I really enjoyed the honesty and emotion that Charlie put into it and the vulnerability that he had in his lyrics and storytelling.
The style of his music has changed a lot over the last few years. Actually, more than a few years. I guess since his first album that he released in 2016. Yes. And he's grown a lot as a person. And it's been really cool being able to watch his journey. And
yeah, there's something really cool about listening to an artist's entire discography, because I think that's something I don't do very much. But when I have, it's so interesting to see how they grow through each song and each album. And more often than not, I think they have kind of a distinct style and tone for each album. And there's always some improvement. Of course, there's like really good kind of classic songs in their older albums, but I think you can always see that forward movement and growth in each album they release.
Yes, definitely. And talking about listening to artists' full discographies, that's kind of what I always do when coming across a new artist, because I believe that it's important to listen to every single song that an artist releases, because full discographies, like artists' full discographies, usually tell a story. And if you only listen to a section of that story or only a small part of that story, it's kind of impossible to know who the artist is, you know? And if you really want to connect with the particular artist that you're listening to, I think it's important to know as much as you can about that artist. You don't have to know everything, but it makes it more fun when you know the small details about the artist, because it almost feels like you know them as a friend, not in a parasocial way or anything, but it's very sweet. I guess now, Mia, you can talk about how you discovered BTS through Charlie.
Yeah. So I guess this is the first connection of our invisible string. So if it hadn't been for Andrea introducing me to Charlie, I would never have started listening to BTS. And the funny thing is that I don't listen to K-pop. Like, if anyone had asked me in the past, do you listen to K-pop? I would have said no. And I always thought that I would never get into it. And I also never listened to music with rap. So I never thought I would listen to it. So it's really saying a lot that I got into BTS through Charlie Puth. And how this happened was one day, Angie and I were working on a mock marketing campaign for Charlie Puth, and we were watching some of his music videos so that we could get a taste for how his style and brand has changed over the years. And one of the music videos that Andrea chose to watch was Left and Right, which features Jungkook of BTS. And then I remember enjoying this song when I first listened through Charlie's discography, and kind of rediscovered it through this watching of the music video. And then later I found a behind the scenes video of this music video. And then later I watched a behind the scenes video of this music video, because I will watch the behind the scenes of anything. And I was really surprised by how grounded and down to earth Jungkook was. And so this made me really interested in learning more about BTS and their music. And it was kind of a really good timing, because at this time, BTS was just releasing their newest album, and they were just going on tour too. So there's a lot of excitement within the fandom about their music. So I was really, I guess, lucky to join or to kind of find out more about BTS at this time.
To end this little section, I thought, why not talk about our favorite songs by Charlie and BTS? So why don't you go first, Mia?
There are so many Charlie songs that I enjoy, but my two favorites are Change and Is It Just Me? And then for my favorite BTS songs, probably Merry Go Round and Life Goes On. And these were songs that I never would have imagined that BTS would write, just, I guess, because I had a very different image of what kind of music they wrote. But these songs are very meaningful and I think very relatable. And I think they relate to very important topics that make listeners feel like very seen and very comforted. And I think that's why I realized that I really enjoy BTS's music, because there's definitely a lot of profound meanings within their work that if you were on the outside, you might not realize that they have. And what about your favorite Charlie songs?
That's also very hard for me, because I love so many of his songs. But if I were to choose two, I would say Through It All, which is a more emotional ballad that I like to listen to when I'm feeling down, and it usually lifts me up and makes me feel better emotionally when I listen to it. And for my second song, you know what? I'm not going to choose one. I'm going to choose multiple from his second album, Voice Notes, because I love that album a lot. I listened to about half of the songs on that album very consistently, and some of them are The Way I Am, Attention, LA Girls, How Long, Slow It Down, and Empty Cups. I can't possibly choose a favorite out of those, so I'm just going to say that all of those are my favorite, along with Through It All, which is actually also on Voice Notes. I don't listen to that one as much, even though it's my favorite, which probably doesn't make sense to the average listener. But I've talked about it in articles that I've written on Substack that I don't really like to listen to sadder and more emotional songs as often, because when I'm feeling good emotionally, sometimes the aspect of listening to sad music brings me down. But I kind of went on a tangent there, but those are my favorite songs by Charlie.
And it is really interesting how much of an impact music can have on your mood, like lifting you up or bringing you down. And so I guess that means it's really important what music you listen to.
I agree. So why don't you talk about the BTS member that you started listening to a lot because of you listening to BTS?
So the next connection in the visible string goes from BTS to V, who is a member of BTS. He's one of the vocalists in the band. And during BTS's hiatus, V did some solo work. And he produced some really beautiful songs that I wouldn't have expected a member of BTS to produce. So his songs have a kind of older, jazzy R&B style. And some of my favorites are Slow Dancing and Winter Bear. And something really nice about these songs is that they're so comforting and they kind of feel like a warm hug. And so I like to listen to these a lot when I go on walks at night. And something I admire about V as an artist is that he's not afraid to be himself. And he shows up as himself wherever he goes and often purposefully goes against what other people are doing. And you can see this in the kind of music that he chose to make during his solo time. Like, it was very different from what people would have expected, I think. And so that's something I really admire about him as an artist. And it's just really amazing how I would never probably have listened to him if it hadn't been for Andrea. So yeah, it's pretty incredible how one artist can lead to another artist like that.
It's pretty interesting how people tend to judge artists they don't know, like how they would judge a book by its cover. Because I think a lot of people have the same experience where they think an artist release a certain kind of music because of the singles they have released. And it's not until the person takes a deep dive into the artist's discography that they really learn who this artist is as a singer, a writer, and it just kind of shows that people need to be more open-minded about listening to new artists, because just because you know a song or two doesn't mean you know the artist, and doesn't mean that you should judge the artist either. And I don't think people should give their full opinions on an artist until they know their entire discography.
I agree. Yeah, just basing your opinion of them off of one or a couple songs is kind of like...
It's unfair.
Yeah, it is a little. Or like taking a clip from an interview or a book or something and making a judgment on the entire work based on that. It's just taking it out of context, and it's not really a good way of understanding them fully. And thinking about like Charlie Puth and BTS, if you think of their most popular songs are the ones that showed up the most on the radio, like Attention for Charlie Puth.
We Don't Talk Anymore.
Yeah, they are so different from some of his other songs, like Through It All.
Changes.
Yeah.
Some other songs like Free that he sang for a Disney movie called The One and Only Ivan. That's a very pretty song as well. And yeah, and then what about BTS? I guess Merry Go Round, right?
Yeah, Merry Go Round. Maybe Please from their most recent album. They Don't Know About Us from their most recent album. Yeah, I think often maybe the most loud or kind of catchy songs get featured on the radio more, or they're more well known. because they appeal to a very wide audience. But I think a lot of the songs with the deepest meaning and that could mean a lot to someone are kind of hidden a lot, which goes back to what Andrew was saying about the importance of listening to an artist's entire discography, because you could find some little treasures in there as you listen.
Yeah, because that's kind of the purpose of singles, though. It's for them to appeal to the general public, and the general public enjoys the more upbeat pop songs that have less meaning. So that's why also, in general, people should think about going into artist discographies more, because that's just the general purpose of singles. And you would think more people would know that by now, but I feel like a lot of people don't understand that still. But now we will get into the artists that I've discovered in interesting ways and how they're connected in some quite funny ways, I would say. But anyway, the first artist I have on this list is Louis Tomlinson. And I discovered him in it was 2023, I think it was May, and I was scrolling on TikTok and I found this video edit where someone made a video of their top 10 listened to artists on Spotify. And there were plenty of famous artists on this list. There's Harry Styles, 5 Seconds of Summer, Lana Del Rey, even Taylor Swift. But the only artist on that list that caught my eye was Louis. Because I think at the time I had heard his name before, and I've heard people talk about him, but I didn't really know who he was. And I don't think I associated him to being a part of One Direction, if I'm correct. It's been a while, so that might be a little bit off. But yeah, so then I listened to him, and then pretty soon after, I learned that he was on tour. And funnily enough, he was coming to my city in just a few weeks. So I got tickets to his tour. And then I went to his concert, and it was incredible. I had the time of my life. And not long after that, I started listening to One Direction because a friend recommended them to me. That part of how I discovered them, quote unquote discovered, because I knew who they were, but how I discovered them is a little bit foggy in my brain. But that's when I started listening to them. And the reason why Louis played a role into me discovering them is that in almost every concert, Louis sings at least one or two One Direction songs. And for my concert and for the Faith in the Future tour, he mainly sang Night Changes and Where Do Broken Hearts Go? And at the time, I was listening to Louis' set list purely because I wanted to know all the songs and be familiar with them for the concert. So I listened to his set list on repeat, and those two songs were on that set list. So that's how I got my first taste, really, of how they sounded as a band. I guess it's kind of funny that the opposite things happened to us, because I discovered One Direction from Louis Tomlinson, but you discovered V from BTS, which does make more sense.
I guess that shows how artists who start solo careers after having been in bands kind of have a bit of a leg up, because they have a little tunnel through which existing fans of their band can go reach them. And it also helps the band because maybe people find them through their solo career and then go and find out more about the band, and then the members of that band and maybe their solo careers. And then also with collaborations like Charlie Puth and Jungkook, that's also how a lot of fans can discover other artists like that. Yeah, if the string is not so invisible all that time. I guess, yeah, in that case, it wouldn't be invisible. So after
listening to One Direction and getting familiar with their entire discography, of course, I started listening to Harry Styles, who is another member of One Direction. I'm assuming that most of you who are listening already know that. But unfortunately, though, the timing of when I started listening to Harry was absolutely horrible because he had just finished his tour that he was on for quite a while. So it meant that he was going to be taking a very long break. So it wasn't until this year that I got to listen to new music by him for the first time. And it was exciting, though. And even though I had to wait this many years, it was very fun. And his new album is very, very good. And yeah, okay. But ironically, though, I had heard one of his songs about 3 years before learning who he was as an artist. And the song that I heard was Sign of the Times. And it was because a friend of mine at the time said that it was their favorite song. So I was like, I have to check it out. So I did, and I really, really enjoyed it. But I didn't know who Harry was. But at the same time, since I wasn't really into listening to pop music as much, I didn't have the desire to go on a deeper dive of his music. So, yeah.
So, do you have any favorite songs from those 3 artists?
I have plenty. For Louis, my favorite songs are Don't Let It Break Your Heart, Change, and Habit. And then for One Direction, my favorite ones are Little White Lies, Where Do Broken Hearts Go, and Clouds. I think those are all very songs. And then for Harry, it's mainly one song, and it's called Sweet Creature. This invisible string in my line of artists leads to another One Direction member, ultimately, and it's Niall Horan. And I don't exactly remember what led me to listening to him, but I do remember loving a lot of his songs immediately, such as Put a Little Love on Me, No Judgment, Black and White. I think those songs and the entire album, Heartbreak Weather as a whole, really showcase his talent, and I think it fits his style the most out of all his albums. And yeah, Niall actually ends this particular chain of mine, which is pretty long, consisting of 4 artists.
So before moving on to the next artist, we thought it would be interesting to discuss BTS and One Direction together, since they're both bands who were popular around the same time, but they have very different music and very different stories. And so we plan on unpacking these 2 bands in their own separate article and podcast.
Yes. And I'm honestly very excited to do that podcast because I think after we do research on each other's favorite bands, I think we'll have a lot to talk about. And I hope that we have some meaningful conversations in regarding to them. And you guys as listeners should look forward to it as much as we are. Anyway, I'm going to move on to the next few artists that I have on this list. And most of them are, all of them are indie artists. So I hope that I can promote them a little bit through this podcast and by talking about them here. Anyway, the first artist on this list is Fightmaster. And if you are an avid reader of our Substack, you know that I talk about them a lot. But I wanted to mention them here because I technically did find them through an invisible string, through the show Grey's Anatomy. I've been a fan of Grey's since 2019, and it's played a very big role in my life. And I always say this, and not to be cliche, but I really wouldn't be where I am right now if it wasn't for this show. But anyway, in 2021, Fightmaster joined the Grey's Anatomy cast in season 18 and played a neuroscientist named Kai Bartley. And I immediately was a fan of them and their character. And this is what eventually led me to listening to their music in 2025. And I won't go too deep into it because I have an article coming up where I talk about my experience as a fan, and I plan on going deeper into that aspect. But I guess you could say that I wouldn't have discovered Fightmaster if it wasn't for Grey's Anatomy. So I have Grey's to thank for that, because Fightmaster now is one of my favorite artists, one of my top listened to artists, and I basically listen to their music every day. And it just brings me so much comfort, and I don't know what I would do without their music. And it's so special to me. But anyway, I'm going to talk about the next artist now. His name is Alex Sampson, and he's a pop artist that makes a lot of catchy pop songs that are pretty similar to One Direction and 5 Seconds of Summer. So if you enjoy their music, I think you would enjoy Alex's. But the invisible string for him is kind of complicated, so I won't go too deep into it, but I will explain kind of why he's on this list. So I discovered him through a cover that he did of Viva La Vida at a concert he had in Seoul, Korea. And I saw this video on YouTube Shorts, and when I watched it, I immediately was like, his voice is very good. So I wanted to listen to his discography. So I listened to his music, and this was in January this year. So I haven't been a fan for too long, but it's been very fun being a fan of him because he has such a bubbly personality, and it makes being a fan of him just so much more enjoyable. But anyway, now I'm going to go into why the invisible string is kind of complicated. And it's because I actually have come across him as an artist multiple times before I actually came across him in the Viva La Vida video. So about a year or two prior, I came across this YouTube short of his where he was promoting his song called Want You, and he was pretending that he put a prompt into an AI song generator, and he told it to generate a song combining the styles of One Direction and 5 Seconds of Summer. But at the end of the video, he just played his song. And I remember loving the video, but it didn't make me think, I'm going to listen to him. But then in about a year after that, I actually added the song Want You to a long playlist that I have where I add songs that I hear in public that I really enjoy. And I didn't notice this until a couple months after I started listening to Alex. And when I was looking back at that playlist, I thought it was so interesting that I had already discovered this song, but I didn't really remember it at all when I was listening to it along with his whole discography when I actually officially discovered him. Okay. Now, enough about Alex. Actually, not enough about Alex. It's, funnily enough, he plays a big role in the name of our podcast, which is called Serotonin Now. It's based off of the word serotonin, which is one of the songs in his discography, which happens to be my favorite song by him. And we thought it was... Actually, no, not we. Mia came up with the name for this podcast, and I thought it was so creative. So I immediately was like, yes, we have to use that name. So that is why this is the name of our podcast. And everyone needs to thank Mia for coming up with such a creative and fun podcast name. But anyway, I've been talking for so long, but I'm going to be talking about the last artist now, which is Jessica Biel. I actually had been a fan of her for quite a while before listening to her music because of her YouTube channel. Because I discovered her channel when I was in high school and I had watched her videos a lot, but it wasn't until 2025 that I started getting into her music, and I regret not getting into it earlier because her music is the definition of pop perfection, and I'm a huge fan of pop. So it hurt my heart knowing that I went so many years without listening to her. But to be more positive, at least I'm listening to her now, and I would recommend anybody who is a big fan of pop to listen to her. I'm out of breath because I've been talking so much, but my section is over.
It's really interesting how a few of the artists you discovered was through social media, like YouTube or I guess TV show. And I guess it shows the importance of kind of having different platforms as an artist so that you get discovered. You never know when your next fan will find you or how they will find you. And I know there's quite a few musicians now who used to be actors. And I think the fact that they used to be actors really helped them get a head start in building their fan base.
I agree. And those kinds of artists tend to have a wider range of fans because they have people that are fans of them as a singer, as an artist, and if they do more than just those two, then even more than that. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and they have more kind of ports of entry. Like, people don't find them just because they're a musician, but maybe if they watch their show or watch their YouTube channel or something, then they'll also find their music, and vice versa. If they listen to their music, they'll find their other platforms. So it helps kind of all aspects of their career to have more branches in their tree.
Yeah. And I think that also allows singers or just artists to have a wider range of fans as well. Because I guess, example with Fine Master, I would say that their presence on social media through podcasts and stuff, it's definitely more unserious. So there's definitely a lot of fans that are probably more intrigued by that part of them. But then there's also their music, which I would say is more serious. So if there's people who are more into like the more serious side of them, they probably just focus on their music. And obviously there's going to be people who are also fans of both, which me, example, that's also me. But it's so cool how many ways artists can, I guess, develop fan bases. So I guess to end this podcast, I thought it would be fun to talk about who on this list is the most similar to each other and who is the most different. And I think we can do music-wise, personality-wise, and anything else that you think of. But you can go first.
I think music-wise, like you said earlier, Alex Sampson and One Direction, but also Alex Sampson and Charlie Puth. I think maybe those three, One Direction, Charlie Puth, Alex Sampson, all have kind of a similar music style. Of course, not the same, but I think if you're a fan of one of them, you could probably find songs by the others that you enjoy. Different sound, I think maybe One Direction and V, because One Direction is very pop. A lot of their songs are very intense, I think. And then V is very chill and very slow and kind of like jazzy and kind of older style. And so I think there's a really sharp contrast between those two artists.
So for me, the artists that I think are the most similar are probably Alex and Jessica, because they are both pop artists and they release pretty similar pop music with their own styles, but they're very similar in my opinion. And like Mia said, if you're a fan of one of them, there's a high chance that you would like the other one as well. And then for the artists that I think are the least similar to each other, I would have to say Five Master and One Direction, because first of all, Five Master makes alternative music and it's not for the radio at all. There is nothing mainstream about their music. And One Direction, ultimately, first of all, they are a band. They're not a solo artist, and they release a lot of, they're not together as a band anymore. Why am I using present tense? Well, but they release a lot of upbeat pop songs, kind of about similar topics as well, like love and relationships and all that. And Five Master writes about a lot more varying topics and more serious topics about the world, the state of the world, and it's more meaningful in a way. Not to say that One Direction songs aren't meaningful. They are in their own boy band way, but Five Master's music has a bit more depth to it. But I also want to talk about, funnily enough, who I think is the most similar on this list, personality-wise. And people might not guess this, but I would say Five Master and Louis Tomlinson, because they have a very similar, unhinged personality. And I guess seeing like them in interviews, it's very, very funny watching them both in interviews. And actually, they're also similar in how they write their music, because they both write more serious lyrics and more serious songs. And so they're similar in how they're in real life. They're more, I guess, unhinged and funny, but in their music, they show a different side of them. Well, I think that's it, right? Yeah. So thank you so much for listening to Thank You Next. And once again, my name is Andrea.
And I'm Mia.
And we will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening.